So I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to anybody here to hear that the creation of visual content, photos and videos, has absolutely exploded in recent years. If you take a historical perspective, it's absolutely unprecedented. We're talking about orders of magnitude over what it was even 10 years ago. So what's driving that is actually three interrelated forces. The first is new uses of imaging that have emerged. All of these are huge. Since we're particularly focusing here on social networking, I'll give you a sizing measure that relates to that. Facebook increments by close to 1 billion pictures each month. Now, the interesting thing about all of these new uses is that they help people manage their daily lives. They're much more utilitarian, in a good sense of the word, than the traditional use of photography, which was the pictures as memories Kodak moment, which was largely limited to these affluent societies. And as a result, what's happened is that the market for imaging has expanded to become a global market that includes very large populations in places like Asia, China, India, South America, Africa, and so on. And as a result of this, you see the consumption and use of image capture devices absolutely going through the roof. Now, what underlies this is digital imaging technology. As Tom was saying, imaging technology started when we discovered that we could paint bisons on the walls of caves. And if you look at what actually determines the impact of any given technology in terms of its ability to enable the creation of visual content, there are three dimensions. The first is skill. How much skill does it take to actually be able to use that technology? Obviously, the greater amount of skill that is required, the more friction is generated here. Second is time. The more time it takes to create an image, the more friction, the less impact of the technology. And largely as a function of these two, you get the third dimension, which is cost. And of course, the greater the cost, the more limited the impact. So let's take a look at how this plays out with something like representational painting, which was the dominant imaging technology roughly from the beginning of civilization through the 19th century. Skill level required to produce a convincing image, very high. Time requirement, weeks to months. And as a result, cost very high. And the economic model that you have for this is patronage. Princes, popes, people, the power elites essentially control by hiring the people who have the skill level, and they control the diffusion of visual technology, of visual content to a large extent as a way of projecting their political power. So let's look at how that happens. Essentially, because of these parameters, the number of creators is very small, the number of images being created is very small, and the audience reach is also small because you have to be in close physical proximity to the image in order to be able to see it. Now let's move to the beginning of photography. The skill level doesn't change a lot. These people had to mix their own chemicals, coat glass plates, crazy stuff. But what does change very radically is the time requirement. It takes a lot less time to produce an image. And as a result of that, the cost goes down, and you have the first business based on imaging technology, which is the portrait photography business. For the first time in history, average people have the ability to have their likeness preserved. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but what you can see is that with each generation of the technology, the limitations decrease, and the reach, the impact expands to the point where we are today, where we essentially have a frictionless environment for the creation of visual content, and we essentially have an unlimited audience. Another way to look at this, which I think is very important, is to say that with each generation of the technology, the ability to create visual content becomes democratized and moves from elites to the masses, to where we are today. What does this mean as we extrapolate forward? The first thing that I think is very significant is the emergence of visual language. Visual language doesn't mean that we're going to replace language with visuals wholesale. It does mean, though, that where we use language to describe the physical world, as opposed to concepts, feelings, etc., language is actually a very ineffective tool. and we do much better with visuals. So we're moving from using language to describe to using visuals and displaying them. If we talk about 3 years from now, one projection that I could make is the emergence of communication devices that seamlessly integrate language and visuals as communication media. Another interesting thing that I think we can project going forward is sort of a radical redefinition of the role and place of art in society. Due to the interaction of imaging technology, which essentially removes a lot of the technical barriers to creativity, and social networking, because the community and mutual sort of reinforcement aspect is very important here. Let me just give you a few numbers about Flickr, which is sort of the poster child for this, because I think it's pretty significant. In the spring of 2005, Flickr had 225,000 users and hosted 3 million images. By that fall, they had grown to 775 million users, 1,000 users, and they were hosting 20 million images. The latest figures that we have from this summer, Flickr is hosting 3 billion images with 5,000 images being added every minute. So we're talking about something that's pretty significant. And in closing, I'm going to leave you with a really long-term perspective, which is that as we look out into the future, this all gets bionic. Thank you very much.